think you get the volume turned up pretty high.
I'm going to take this away.
It's because Larry turned it up last week and messed with this. So is it any better now? Test 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay now? We'll call to order the special board meeting of the Board of Supervisors for Monday, February 27, 2012. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance by Supervisor Haas. If you'd all stand, please.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item is the public comment period open time. Pursuant to state law and board policy, no board discussion shall be held and no action shall be taken on non-agendized open time matters other than to receive the comments and, if deemed necessary by the board, to refer the subject matter to the appropriate department for follow-up or to schedule the matter for a subsequent board agenda. I have a number of speaker requests up here. Some of them aren't marked and some are. I don't know if you want to speak during the open time or if you want to speak to the one item on the agenda. So I'll call your name. If you wish to wait till the agendized item, you can do that. If you want to speak during open time, you can come on up. First person I have is Chet Szymanski.
I'll speak.
Great. Just come up here and give us your name, please, and you have 3 minutes.
Members of the board, Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I just want to present the fact that these meetings are always at 9 in the morning or and 2 in the afternoon. It's tough for people that are working or have a job to make these meetings. So in my opinion, I think you'd have more public input and more citizens, taking part in what's going on if they were held at a different time. And that's my opinion, so I'd appreciate it if you would consider that. Thank you.
Next person I have is Mr. Gary Cadd. You want to do the item? Okay. Next person is Terry Raposo.
I'll go ahead and wait also.
Great. Don Kirk.
I'll wait.
Sally Raposo. Great. Thank you. And Wyatt Paxton. You wait then? Okay, great. Thank you. So that'll be the close of the public comment period. We'll move on to R1, General Government. Take the following actions. Conduct a workshop to discuss the ability of the Board of Supervisors to delegate appointing authority to the County Administrative Officer and for the existing authority for the County Administrative Officer to supervise, oversee, and evaluate county department heads, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As explained in the staff report and the agenda, the purpose of this meeting and this workshop is to give some information to the board concerning its legal authority to delegate to the CAO the appointing authority for various department heads, and also to basically refresh the board's memory concerning what the level of supervision that currently exists under the county ordinances that's been delegated to the CAO to supervise, oversee, and evaluate county department heads. Without going into a lengthy discussion of the information that's already in the board report, I will summarize. Essentially what the courts have said and what the Attorney General has said in its published opinions is that when the legislature entrusts a matter of discretion to this Board of Supervisors, the exercise of that power may not be delegated to the CAO or any other officer in the absence of a statutory provision allowing such delegation. Now, in the situation where you're dealing with department heads who qualify as county officers, in essence, what the Attorney General has said and what the and courts have said as well is that when it's a county officer that either the legislature has said explicitly by statute is to be appointed by the board or has indicated by implication is to be appointed by the board, then that county officer is to be appointed by the board. The board cannot delegate that appointing authority to the CAO, and that was laid out in a longstanding Attorney General opinion back in 1972. Now, there have been some discussions about certain department heads, which I won't go into great detail here, but like, for example, the Public Works Director. By statute, the Public Works Director is a county officer, and by statute, he is appointed by the Board of Supervisors. That's a position that could not then be delegated to the CAO for appointment. And as outlined in the staff report, there are a number of other positions that would also qualify as county officers that are appointed by the board. There are some, though, that are currently in our current personnel rules, or current department heads that are appointed by the board that would not qualify as county officers. They are the Director of Housing and Community Action Programs, the Veteran Service Officer, and the Intermountain Fair Manager. So if the board so decided to exercise its discretion to have those particular positions appointed directly by the CAO, it could lawfully do that. There are also two positions that are also appointed by the CAO with the ratification of the board, and those are the Chief Technology Officer and the Director of Support Services. Again, those positions can, of course, continue to be appointed by the CAO, and the board can decide that they do not need to ratify that. That would be something that would be within your purview. So with that in mind, the other issue that exists is the existing authority of the CAO. And the CAO has some certain delegated authority from the board for supervision. And so it goes back again, as I will explain this first of all, is that the Board of Supervisors itself has the authority to supervise all county officers to ensure that they faithfully perform their duties. Now, there are certain limits in that regard. One, of course, is that the board cannot affect the independent investigative duties of the sheriff or the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the district attorney. And the board can also cannot perform a county officer's statutory duties for them or direct the manner in which the duties are performed. In that regard, if the board were to look at the existing administrative policy 1-500, which is attached to the board report, it does indicate some of the things that the board can exercise as far as supervisory authority to both appointed and elected department heads. And that's on page 1 of Administrative Policy 1-105 at the bottom. The board can, as it indicates there, audit the accounts of county officers, have them provide regular inventories of county property, require the auditor controller to audit the accounts, employ experts to examine the books and accounts of county officers, and also have any member of any officer of the county appear before this board and give testimony concerning the actions that they've been taking. Now, as far as the current CAO's authority exists, and this is all currently laid out in the ordinance establishing the position of the county administrative officer, the board has appropriately delegated certain supervisory functions to the CAO, which include such things as directing and coordinating the administrative activities of all county offices, administering policies established by the Board of Supervisors. The CAO shall supervise the performance of county departments within the limitations established by the law or the board by directing the establishment of standards, goals, and objectives for departmental performance and to measure the performance of individual departments against those standards and goals. The CAO shall periodically evaluate existing departmental programs and recommend changes to the board where changes are indicated. And the CAO shall evaluate the performance of appointed department heads except for the county council and the clerk of the Board of Supervisors, who now currently the CAO serves as the clerk of the Board of Supervisors. And upon direction of the board, the CAO shall recommend to the board the appointment, suspension, or other discipline or the dismissal of any department head that's appointed by the board. And under the existing personnel rules, The board has indicated that the CAO can provide such recommendations for positions such as the Public Works Director, Director of Resource Management, the Director of Housing and Community Action Programs, the Veteran Service Officer, Child Support Services Director, Intermountain Fair Manager, Public Defender, and the Health and Human Services Agency Director. So that's in a nutshell as far as what the current authority exists that's been delegated to the CAO as far as the supervisory authority. Of course, the central issue that exists as far as the if there is a situation where the CAO believes or recommends that a particular department head or county officer, I should say, that is appointed by the board should be removed, then that would be a recommendation back to this board to exercise its authority. And again, that ultimate decision rests with the Board of Supervisors and would not be able to be delegated to the CAO. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any further clarification to any member of the board.
Thank you. Mr. Baugh?
Thank you, Chair Modi. I want to go back to, you've partially covered it, but I want to expand on it, your thoughts of the actual practical lines of authority. I understand what you've shared with us in terms of county officer status and direct line of authority from the board. But on a practical basis, on a day-to-day basis, how does this county carry out the exercise and the will of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors in terms of the activities of, let's just choose the Public Works Department and the Resource Management Department? How do you see that functioning?
Well, as it's currently, as I understand the ordinance as it exists, the board can appoint, I'll take the Public Works Director as an example, can appoint a person to occupy the position of Public Works Director. That person then has certain statutory obligations and would therefore then be able to exercise those, have the authority to exercise those obligations in connection with the day-to-day operations of the department. And the law indicates that the board cannot basically micromanage, cannot direct the manner in which those day-to-day operations exist or how it's carried out. And that's laid out currently in the Administrative Policy 1-500 in the board's policies. Now, the board, of course, to the extent within its purview, can establish policies or direction to the Public Works Director, can also provide that direction to the CAO, who can then implement that policy and see whether or not those general terms or the general standards expectations are being met, which, as I understand it, is currently being done. I believe the CAO issues performance evaluations of the Public Works Director based upon standards and expectations from this board and the law, and gives evaluations based upon that. And I'm sure, of course, if the CAO believed that there were derelictions of duty or other things, that would be something that would be relayed to the board for any particular recommendations as far as discipline or other sorts of personnel actions.
Could you take a look at your report, page 8 of 10? I'm just going to read the first couple, maybe the first line. While the Board of Supervisors may not delegate complete authority to the county administrative officer to supervise other county officers, the board may delegate supervisory authority to the county administrative officer. That is, and this is the part I want you to expand on, because it kind of has that lawyer-ese look to it, is channeled by a sufficient standard. Would you care to expand on that and its meaning?
Yes. The law recognizes that basically the board cannot give, let's say, carte blanche supervisory authority and say basically it would be considered an abdication of its responsibility, saying, here, Mr. Lees, go supervise. What the law indicates, though, is that when we say a specific standard, the courts and the Attorney General, for that matter, will look to see, well, is there some sort of parameters that exist that will serve as the standard by which this supervision occurs. And I would say the standard that currently exists is that the county officers will faithfully perform their duties as indicated by the general law that exists, that is the ultimate standard, that they faithfully perform their duties. And also by looking at their job descriptions and the statutes that exist as to what their job duties are, which will establish whether or not and give direction to the CAO in that supervision as to whether or not they are faithfully discharging the duties of their office. With the ultimate decision being, of course, as far as whether to retain, hire, or fire remains with the board.
At one time, and if you could maybe define some of the history, I understand that the Resource Management Department was, in terms of lines of authority, quite different from what it is now. And according to your report, that, in fact, would have or may have been not legal. So can you kind of explain to me how that occurred and why it was that way?
That I cannot do. I was not here at that time. I have no knowledge as to what the situation was concerning that time. I do know of, under the current law and the ordinance that the Resource Management Director reports, according to the ordinance, reports to the board through the Chief Executive Officer, i.e. the County Administrative Officer. What happened before that time, I cannot comment.
And then just maybe a couple more questions here. On page 5 of 7, the top paragraph says the Resource Management, Director of Resource Management shall serve as the Director of Environmental Health and shall be registered as an environmental health specialist. Is that in fact the case?
To my knowledge, Mr. Mull is a registered environmental health specialist. I haven't independently confirmed that, but that's my understanding. I know when I see his letterhead, he has the initials REHS, which would stand for Registered Environmental Health Specialist.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Then I have a follow-up to Mr. BOS. I think just to clarify a little more in just plain terms, I kind of agree with Mr. BOS trying to get into, but basically the way I understand it is, for instance, under the Public Works Director, the state law says the County Board of Supervisors has the responsibility and the authority to hire and fire that position and cannot give that to somebody else.
That's correct.
Okay. We have the ability to ask the county administrative officer to supervise that person to some degree, but there are particular responsibilities that person has that he has to carry them out to the best of his abilities and judgment, and we can't necessarily tell him how to do that directly.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the board cannot direct any county officer in how they handle their duties, the way to do it, how they do that on a day-to-day basis. Now, in that same regard, the board, through the CAO and the board itself, can supervise any county officer, even the sheriff, even an elected department head, to see whether or not they are faithfully performing their duties. So then it's, in that sense, it's more of a generalized supervision to looking at, just generally speaking, looking at what the expectations are, what the standards are, and are those standards being met.
For instance, then in the sheriff, it's not, we don't have the authority to tell him how to staff the jail or how to staff his patrol division. That's clearly under his purview.
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Mr. Keogh?
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Mr. Cruz, every now and then you hear the term a constitutional officer. A certain employee of the county is a constitutional officer. Could you explain to the board and those in the audience what that means?
Certainly. It may mean different things to different people. To my understanding, a constitutional officer would be a county office that is enumerated specifically in the California Constitution. There are 3 such county offices. They would be the sheriff, the district attorney, and the assessor. Oh, and I should also say the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. So there's 8 total, excuse me. But aside from the Board of Supervisors, it's those 3.
Okay. Will you also talk to us about the chief probation officer?
Certainly. The chief probation officer is also a county officer. By statute, he is appointed by the Superior Court. So the Superior Court does have some authority to, in connection with supervising his work, since they do, of course, have the ultimate decision to hire and fire him. But this board also can provide supervision over the chief probation officer, similar somewhat to the way it would supervise like the sheriff or the assessor for that matter. given the same sort of situation that exists, that it's beyond your ability to hire or fire that particular individual.
Who gives direction to the chief probation officer?
Oh, the chief probation officer's duties are pretty much handled by statute. So it would be something that they would be dictated by what the statute says. If there were concerns as to whether or not the chief probation officer was, again, effectively performing his duties, that would be something that the board could look into and comment upon and perhaps report to the Superior Court concerning its thoughts on the matter.
Okay. And will you again review with us what the relationship is between the board and the elected officials in Shasta County, just so we're crystal clear on what that relationship is?
Certainly. The board has the authority, has supervisory authority over all officials, both elected and appointed. In that regard, with certain elected officials, the board has limitations. For example, with the sheriff, the board by statute cannot interfere with the sheriff's investigative duties. By statute, the board can also not interfere with the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the district attorney. And for the assessor and basically for any other department, as I mentioned before, the board cannot direct the manner in which they perform their duties. For elected department heads, of course, if within, again, these particular limits, one thing the board can do is certainly inspect the books and records of them, employ experts to overlook the books. The assessor would be a typical example of that, because the board probably would not have the expertise to see if there were issues with the assessor, but the board could employ an expert to review those sorts of things and comment back to the board. So that's it. I hope that clarifies it. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz.
Any other questions at this time? Seeing none, I do have some requests to speak from the public. So first individual I have is Mr. Gary Cadd, to be followed by Terry Raposo.
Good afternoon, board, staff, ladies and gentlemen. I stepped forward going through Mr. Cruz's presentation here. I find some problems. Actually, the state legislature did not establish that the Board of Supervisors would appoint Public Works Director. Our Public Works Director and the Resource Management Director wear different hats. Some of those hats are the land surveyor, road manager, environmental health on resource, and there's a number of others. Those hats are the ones that are directed by the state to be appointed by this board. Now, what has happened, the governing ruling on what we're talking about here actually comes from the Shasta County Code 2.40.020. That's where the Public Works and the Resource Director become involved here. And what I am recommending from the citizen side is whichever hats that these two positions carry that are constitutionally directed to be under this board need to be under the board. But the actual Public Works Director and Resource Director need to be put under the CAO. Now, I'm bringing forward here Section E, which I brought before you folks in the past, which stipulates, I don't think the folks in the audience can read it, but what it stipulates is the Board of Supervisors, at the recommendation of the CAO, these people serve at the pleasure of the board. Number one, Public Works. Number two, Resource Director. If you put them under F, they serve at the pleasure of the administrative officer, with you folks as final authority, is what appointing them or asking them to leave if you let someone go. So there's really no problem here at all from us on the public side. We're just asking you to separate the hats, because the hats are what's caused this problem to start with. that whatever the position is, whether it's the road commissioner, surveyor, environmental health, I'm not exactly sure how many different positions are carried here, but whichever the positions that have a constitutional authority to put under you folks, they need to be added to the list under E. Then the Public Works Director and the other hats that come up under these two positions, then they should be put under F, which would be under the CAO. It's not taking the authority, the total authority away from you folks, because you're still involved in it. But it does give us, the CAO, and the point to take our information into, because you folks can't do the day-to-day management. The law tells you you can't. So we do need somebody that does do the day-to-day management on these positions. And this has been my problem all along, especially with the coming Northern Sacramento Valley Integrated Regional Water Management Plan that's coming up. Because we've been going to the meetings, and it's going to be something that we're going to be driving awfully hard.
Thank you, Mr. Cadd. Mr. Raposo, followed.
Yes, if Mr. Cadd needs more time, is it possible you can grant him the time that I have tonight?
No, sir.
Okay.
To be followed by Don Kirk. To be followed by Mr. Don Kirk.
I guess my question would be, if someone did want to defer their time because it is a short period of time, and the comment was interesting and the public found it something they'd like to hear more on, why is it that you would not grant an extra 2 or 3 minutes to that person?
Well, currently we allot 3 minutes for everybody to speak, and I have a number of speakers to come up.
Right,
and
well, this
speak,
is my
so-
time, sir.
Yeah.
So if I want to divert it to someone else, why is it that you, who serve us, would not allow a citizen to do that? I'd just like to know why. Do you have a specific reason, or just to be a specific reason?
Mr. Raposo, anything else you want to talk about?
No, I'd like an answer to my question.
I've just chosen not to do that. If Mr. Cadd wants to get in the back of the line and speak again, then we've done that before.
Oh, sweet. Okay, great. That's great to know. That would be a bit better of an answer, I think. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. Mr. Kirk, to be followed by Sally Raposo.
The main concern I have is that this board do what the Constitution says it needs to do. And if it's supposed to be in charge of certain agencies or certain officials, then I would hope that as elected officials, you would do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Sally Raposo, followed by Wyatt Paxton.
First of all, I want to say thank you for having this meeting here today, opening it up to the public. There were a lot more people who wanted to be here today but were elsewhere, and so for that reason, that's why I'm filming, and the people who weren't able to be here today will be able to view this on our website. So thank you so much for doing that, and I'll send you a link if you'd like to review it as well. My question is as a citizen, if I had a question or a concern for the Public Works officer, who would I go to address that? Would I go to him, and then as it exists now, would I go through my own Board of Supervisor? Would he be able to answer my question or my complaint? It seems like it's kind of cumbersome to have to go. Would there have to be 3 people to answer my question if I had a concern or something regarding this office?
Well, I think to answer your question, that certainly any citizen has the opportunity to contact their supervisor, or any supervisor for that matter, and talk to them and express any concerns they have. And I'm sure that all the board members would be willing to talk to anybody from the public who'd like to call and have an issue with a particular person or department or function that's occurring. I would always recommend that you would contact the department head to start with that person to see what you could resolve there, and you can always contact the CAO, Mr. Lees, as well.
But as it sits now, wouldn't he he is not under Mr. Lees, he's under the Board of Supervisors, so it would have to go through.
Who are you referring to?
Mr. Minturn and Mr. Mull?
Well, I think as you were told, and Mr. Cruz may want to elaborate, but although the county supervisors have the hiring and firing authority, some of the supervision has been delegated to Mr. Lees, so you could talk to Mr. Lees.
So he would be the person that would address my issue after I'd addressed it to one of the other, the Public Works Director and so forth.
You certainly could talk to him. That would be the next person I would refer you to, yes.
And he would be able to rectify whatever it was that I had.
Depends on the problem.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure. Wyatt Paxton, followed by Mary Machado.
Hello. As I understood it, you said employee performance reviews are reviewed by Mr. Larry Lees, CAO. Is that correct? And
Yes.
Are those offered to the public for public review? And those done annually? And can you provide when the last one was done?
Mr. Cruz, you want to report?
Well, performance evaluations are not subject to public review. They are confidential. The employees have a right of privacy associated with those, so no, those are not open to public review. The personnel rules provide that they're done on an annual basis, and I would defer to Mr. Lees as far as the conducting of the performance evaluations for any of the people under his purview.
Evaluations are done annually.
Can you tell me when the last one was done? For, let's say, Director of Resource Management or Public Works?
I'd have to look.
Was it done within the last year? By memory, you don't remember?
Well, you're asking me. If it's done within the last
Evaluations
year.
are done annually.
Yeah,
I
so
don't know when the most recent one was, but it's at least within 12 months.
And I would add one point, just to you. Certainly, any member of the public can express their viewpoint about the performance of any employee to that person's supervisor, and they may choose to document that or use that in some fashion during the evaluation. So it's not like you, a public member, just because you complain about somebody doesn't, that just goes away.
Well, there have been complaints that have not ever been responded to. I've had personally contact with directors that never respond. I'll send an email asking if they missed my email, and they tell me they have not responded. I've actually made applications for building permits. They won't accept them. Won't accept them. Won't tell you what they're in the division of. It's the person who I'm applying for. If you're supervising them, but if Mr. Larry Lees is controlling them or would take the complaints, how do I get that information to the right person and to get a timely service?
Well, if you're not having success with a particular department head, I would suggest you would contact Mr. Lees, but certainly, again, you have the opportunity to contact your own supervisor to express your concerns and see if they can't step in and find some resolution for you.
And if we have a situation where there is no action returned, and do I agendize that item as a supervisor item, or about no action being, I have contacted Mr. Lees about some items, and that did resolve, but in the next week it resolved with another issue with the same client. Frankly, what's happened is I've gotten in a situation doing some service for Mr. Anselmo, and the ordinance has been spread. I believe you have a court ordinance that says if there's a violation, you do not have to issue a building permit. Mr. Anselmo has several properties, and when I applied for a application for service on another parcel, I'm told I have to make a special appointment with somebody who doesn't call me back. I need to know how to process.
Well, again, I would.
Mr. Lees?
Well, you just said that you did talk to him once and the situation got resolved, so that'd be the person that you'd want to talk to again. And it didn't mention if you've talked to your supervisor or not, but again, that's another alternative.
Okay.
Mr. Ball, you wanted to?
Well, I just wanted to add in there on a continuing basis, there are situations that are unresolved by a department and people have complaints. And I've received calls over the years from many people who want some sort of an answer. And then there are times when I can't supply an answer. And I've also advised them that they have other options. And those options are that they can come to the County Board of Supervisors in open session, and under the public comment time, they can also bring that up. And then I've also advised them that under county policy, you can file a complaint directly with the chief deputy clerk of the board, and by law, that complaint has to be answered by the department. And if we could we get the chief deputy clerk of the board to explain that process? Because that's frequently used if people aren't getting answers, and it may not result in the answer you want, but it does result in an answer.
Correct. That's all I'm asking for.
Okay.
That's all I'm asking.
Would you mind, Mr. Chair, if she explained that process? Thank you.
According to policy 1-116, members of the public may send me either an email or something in writing and let me know of what the problem is that they haven't been able to have resolved. So what I do is once I receive the written information, I provide a memo to the department head advising them of this concern. I ask them within 10 days to reply to the individual that has the concern, send a copy of that letter to me, and I give a copy to each member of the Board of Supervisors and the CAO.
What, is that written into the county record anywhere? I mean, I couldn't find it in the policy.
It's admin
personnel-
policy 1-116.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Baxter. Mary Machado, followed by Charles Alexander.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to participate today. My name is Mary Machado. I'm the Executive Director for Shasta Voices, representing our 1,043 supporters. We'd like to offer perhaps some suggestions for your consideration. On certain parts of the issue before you today, we see an opportunity for some positive procedural changes in the way certain decisions are made at Shasta County. Specifically, just because we're reading all your materials here, just because a road commissioner and surveyor are considered duties of a county officer does not mean that all the other unrelated duties performed by the Public Works Director should have no oversight. And just because a Director of Environmental Health is a county officer does not mean that all the other unrelated duties performed by the Resource Management Director should have no oversight. So we'd like to suggest that the rules be changed to allow one of the following two things to happen. One would be to allow the CAO to step in when a member of the general public has an issue that they cannot resolve with either of these two directors relating to those issues not associated with the road commissioner, the surveyor, or the environmental health issues, or health duties. Or if the supervisors prefer, and if they are indeed in charge of each of these two directors and want to keep it that way, assign a member of the Board of Supervisors as a liaison to handle disputes. One could be assigned to the Resource Management Department and another one to the Public Works Department. At least this way, when someone is trying to build something in Shasta County and one individual sitting behind a desk at the county doesn't want them to do so for whatever reason, there is someone else that this citizen can discuss his or her plans with. At the current time, we have basically one Resource Management Director and one Public Works Director that have the sole authority to make whatever decision they want to make. Such a procedure gives the appearance that everyday people are not being treated fairly and that the county doesn't care. At the very least, you could change this perception. I've done some research to see exactly what would be needed in order to officially make changes like these and make them a real procedure. It appears that a change in the wording of the personnel rules to specify which duties of these two departments would be subjected to oversight and by whom would be the first step, and a simple one at that. Second change would need to occur would be updating the existing ordinances and/or codes that govern the policies and procedures of those two departments. During this Great Recession, it would certainly be helpful for those who have the ability and desire to build things that create jobs and bring revenue to our community to know that Shasta County is business friendly, not the other way around. Right now, that's not the message they're receiving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Mr. Alexander.
Thank you for the opportunity here today to address the board on this matter of the policy inquiry. Here's something to consider. What may be helping to motivate the inquiry into the matter? 'Tis, among other things, the case involving R.C. Anselmo. The essential facts are already well enough known. A decision was made somewhere in the process of things to try and require a grading permit that the law doesn't seem to have required in the instant case. A plethora of different agencies, both state and federal, were called in, reportedly, to require additional permittation and expense. The agencies, state and federal, each of them reportedly gave Mr. Anselmo a clean bill of health. Only County Resource Management persisted in attempting to require that which was not required. The county reportedly then attempted to quash the action on grounds that are not even spurious. Appeal after appeal went against the county, yet the county persisted in what, from all appearances, looks like a desperate attempt to save face at all costs. And now for Scandal 2.0, Chapelgate. Mr. Anselmo endeavors to build a chapel on his ranch. The county, in what, from all appearances, most certainly looks like a retributive response, serves Mr. Anselmo with a cease and desist order. And the entire misadventure gets started all over again. Most certainly a certain department head has done his level best to expose the county to much liability. Where might the money have been more prudently spent? A small down payment on the staffing for the proposed AB 900 auxiliary jail facility, perhaps? Sheriff's Department vehicle fleet maintenance? Carry over into the next fiscal year? But why this campaign against Anselmo and others? There wouldn't even be this discussion if there were not the reluctance to hold accountable the Director of Resource Management. At a time when the county, for obvious fiscal reasons, is desperate for new economic growth, the county yet persists in what most certainly appears to be a campaign that defies all common sense. Anselmo's case is just one of several. A certain Martin Niemöller had it right when he wrote his famous poem, First They Came For. And most of us have a good enough idea of how that one goes. All this has helped to motivate the inquiry that is the subject of this afternoon's special meeting. In all this, let's keep in mind the ultimate goal, accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. That's all the requests I have to speak at this time. Does anybody else want to come before the board? Please come up and identify yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak, especially since I was late arriving.
Just give us your name, please.
Yes, Richard Collins.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. I'm a 10-year resident of the Shingletown area, and in the 10 years, I've seen big wheels burned down. I've seen a phony groundbreaking for a new big wheels that never has occurred. We've seen additional bars and bait shops, secondhand knick-knack shops disguised as antique shops, and that seems to be the business model for development of rural Shasta County. I have no interest or no investment or no vested interest in this matter with Anselmo, but just being a 10-year resident of the area, it seems like a good and tasteful and environmentally responsive way to develop rural Shasta County. And so I would ask if there is still something wrong with the way it's being done, that the board or the department heads make a concerted effort to simply explain themselves to the confused general public. We don't know why these kind of things why these kind of developments are not good for the community. And as to this chapel matter, while we've all seen that we have church and prayer out of the public discourse, and we have it out of our schools, and so many of us grew up in neighborhoods where we could walk to our local school or to our local church. And instead now, churches have to be consigned to the industrial sectors of industrial zoned land. And why we couldn't have a church, a chapel, even if it is a private chapel, on a picturesque setting the way it appears to be is simply baffling to a lot of local residents. What's wrong with the business model that's being suggested by the kind of development that's being done by Mr. Anselmo? And so I would ask that an effort be made by the board to explain to the non-invested but still active members of the rural community in Shasta County, and maybe even make it a part of the evaluation process, the annual evaluation process discussed earlier. What have you done to explain yourself to the general community, especially on matters that seem to arise to the level of a controversy? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Would anyone else like to speak before the board? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for any further questions or discussion by board members. Maybe to start with Mr. Cruz, one thing was brought up was that the state identifies the road commissioner and surveyor, but there's nothing it says about the public works director. And I thought you provided with us some information on page 3 of your report on the third to last paragraph on some government code sections that do establish the public works director. Is that correct? That they may be consolidated?
Yes, that's the way the government code is written is that there are 2 county offices, road commissioner and surveyor. The government code also allows those 2 offices to be consolidated into a single office entitled Public Works Director, and that's in the government code. And the county has done that in its Shasta County Code, consolidating those 2 offices into the Public Works Director. Both of those offices are by statute appointed by the board. The surveyor could potentially be an elected office, but the board has decided by ordinance to say they'll be appointed by the board. So yes, and both of those offices are established by statute, and the Public Works Director position is established by statute. It gives the board the authority to create it. Okay,
I just want to clarify that because it seemed like that was something that was unknown to the individual who brought that up, and I believe if you have it correct here, it's Government Code Section 24304.
Yes, there's 2 that identify the Public Works Director position. It's Government Code Section 24300 and Government Code Section 24304.
Okay, so there is state statute for that position.
Yes.
Public Works. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Baugh.
I was going to start by asking if you wanted to go through the list, which you did. Start to do. Were there other questions you wanted to bring up that were raised by the public? If not, I'll go ahead and.
Well, there was one other one, and you have some additional ones on your list, but one I saw was discussion about supervision by the CAO, and there was a comment made that the Public Works Director and the Resource Management have the sole authority to do what they want. And I'm not quite sure what that comment was supposed to mean, because I mean they have some guidelines they have to follow as far as what the state says the performance of their duties, but they don't have sole authority to make decisions for everything that the county does on every single issue, I don't think.
Well, no, not on every single issue. I mean, as far as again, as indicated already in the current county code, the CAO does have supervisory authority that's been delegated by the board to oversee these functions to see if they are, again, faithfully performing their duties. The board itself has the said supervisory authority. And also certain functions, depending upon what code sections are at issue, I'll take, for example, the zoning code. Any decision or determination by the planning director can be appealed to the planning commission for decision. And similarly, any determinations related to the building code can be appealed to the Board of Building Appeals. So it's not as if they're out there, can do whatever they want, and they're doing whatever they want. There may be some areas where by statute they have that authority, but it's not as if it's, there are areas where it exists that this board and Mr. Lee's and other provisions of the code come into play.
And I think even if it's identified by statute, I think it's important to remember that they're also dictated to them are state and federal laws that they have to comply with. And the air resource manager comes up to mind, or that portion of the resource management position. There are state laws and federal laws that they have to comply with also. So it's not just a free run. And in additional, I don't think this was spoken to directly, but budget authority is certainly held at the Board of Supervisors level and or my level, and I do enforce that. And so the spending has to be within their budget authority. It has to be also within their line of appropriations, and if not, that has to come back in a public session to the board during the year. So there's things like that that we do actually control, so it's not.
You know, I just want to ask one more question, Mr. Lee. Is there anything you're aware of that that the Public Works Director has done, any decision regarding water-related projects or building projects or road projects that you're not aware of? I mean, are there things like that being done that you haven't heard from
Oh,
him?
I'm sure there's, yeah. I mean,
when we're going to build a bridge, you know about it.
Yeah, major projects we all know about, but I think they probably get daily inquiries, resource management, public works, I'm sure they get.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about things that they do when they're making major decisions and spending money. As you supervise them on those issues, you're aware
Well,
of
not
those.
only that, those items have to come to the board because it's usually requiring a budget appropriations, so it becomes then public session or public information again.
Mr. Boggs, want to continue, please?
Thank you. There were three things that were mentioned that interest me specifically. Mr. Kirk used the words constitutional authority. I am very much interested in maintaining our constitutional authority as our local government and making sure that everything we do today complies with that. And Mr. Cruz, I'll hold you accountable to make sure that we remain there. Mr. Alexander used one word that got my attention, accountability. I believe all of us on the board are interested in accountability, and that's what has literally generated this entire conversation. I thought Mary Machado actually expressed it best. I appreciated her perspective. I would be interested in finding out whether or not it is possible to gain additional oversight and authority through the county administrator's office, or if we were to change that name to, that's another question here, chief executive officer, what that would mean. I would like to know that we as a board, when we direct a policy or cast a vision or mandate on behalf of the people, that we have that carried out. That makes total sense to me and always has. I believe that that is what is happening, but if there are ways that we're discussing here today that can make that more effective, I would be interested in hearing those. I would like to know if the word that Mary used, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I heard it kind of reflected Mr. Cad's earlier comments, kind of a separation of the positions and the authority there. I'd like to discuss that a little bit more and what that might involve, if that is possible. I would like to see that authority granted to you on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, that we can know that the day-to-day activities of the county are being carried out. And frankly, I want you to be responsible. I want to be able to hold you accountable because you're the guy who works for us right here. And I'd like to make sure that that's we're getting our money's worth, Mr. Lees.
Okay, I'm going to share a perception there and comments of my feelings on this, and I want Mr. Cruz to step in if I'm saying something that would not be legally acceptable. So.
Well, that's my next question was to ask you your opinion. So go right,
so we'll jump in there. As it relates to the separating out and this is the way I take this, the separating out the officer portions of a person's responsibility to other things, the remainder of things, and then having me directly responsible for those other things, and then the board responsible for those things that are officers. That to me it sounds legal. It sounds very, very cumbersome and difficult to me, though. When you're, and I'm just being candid here, not that I don't want it, and I'll have a recommendation in a sec, but it becomes cumbersome when a person, well, I'm not acting on behalf of Public Works, I'm acting on water surveyor now, or whatever it is. I mean, it just becomes difficult when you are serving different masters with the same position. So it becomes cumbersome and difficult. What I would rather see is a enhancement of and I'll let Mr. Cruz talk about that paragraph, but an enhancement of the level of authority. We're not changing the constitutional officer stuff, but enhancement of my responsibilities in ensuring the daily supervisions are stronger. And I don't know what that means. I'm just, you know, as I say that, it doesn't mean that we're not changing any of the constitutional laws or rules. But certainly with a stronger emphasis for me to become, as time permits, more daily involved in the supervision as our county code dictates somewhere, correct? Or am I rambling?
Well, again, it's a question of, well, primarily the first question is how you want to organize the position, and I'll take the Public Works Director because it's easier to deal with because you're talking about the road commissioner and the surveyor and all those duties associated with that. The county code already provides that the CAO will supervise the performance of that county department as well as various other departments. So that's already there. Now this board and either the CAO has the ability to direct the manner in which the Public Works Director performs those duties on a day-to-day basis, which is set out there. But as already allowed, the board and the CAO can make sure that they are faithfully performing those duties. So if you are getting a lot of complaints, if there are other things that require some sort of further investigation, the board has the authority to look into that. The board has the authority to have the Public Works Director come to the board and explain how things are going, what things are going on. If these things can also be reflected in further policy direction that the board would like to give to any county officer concerning how it is, concerning their duties, so long as it's consistent with their statutory obligations as they exist.
If a majority of the Board of Supervisors chose to give more oversight to Mr. Lees, how would we accomplish that?
Well, maybe before you answer, I thought we've already given him supervisory authority. We've already talked about that.
That's correct.
So I'm not sure what it is that but I understand Ms. Machado's proposal, but I'm not sure how it differs from what we're already doing.
To the extent that Ms. Machado's proposal is saying that we're going to take away, if I think this was the one area that to look at, is to say that if we're able to demarcate that these are the county officer position duties and these are other non-county officer duties that we've given to the Public Works Director to do, if at some point down the line we think, well, we've got an issue now, let's have the CAO now do those duties. That I could see whether or not we can do that or not. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that question off the top of my head. I can see it as being cumbersome as far as how that goes, because then you're trying to make that demarcation. There may be other ways of organizing it. For example, that if the board looked at whatever the Public Works Director is currently doing and saying that we don't want, and identifying right now what those duties are, not right now, but determining what those non-road commissioner / surveyor duties are, take them out right now and give them to the CAO or some other department.
Well, let me ask the question a different way, because I see that I've taken it sideways here. Let's remove Mayor Machado's thoughts for a moment.
Sure.
How can we, as the Board of Supervisors, give the public more assurance that we have supervisory authority that's coming through this man, because we are not in the business of micromanaging these departments or from a practical basis going out as a group of supervisors and dealing with public works or dealing with the resource management department. Mm-hmm. And we employ a county administrative officer. How can we accomplish the goal of assuring the public that the man that we have hired to carry out our authority is in fact doing so? How is that possible?
Let me jump in here. You know, I think it's possible by saying it. Now, there's a couple things we could do. I believe there are some opportunities to clean up policy and some of our personnel rules as it relates to, you know, we've kind of got a mixed match of different positions and different categories, and none of us were probably here when those are put in those categories. And so I think there's some refining we can do there. I mean, we mentioned things like the, you know, whether the IT has to be hired or fired by me or ratified. You know, I think we start by taking all those that legally can be under the CAO or CEO position and make those changes in our personnel rules and do that. I think that helps clarify for the public so we don't have different things and different options depending on who you are. and what title you have. And then for those that are officers, I think we put those together also as it relates to their state law and things like that. And then I think the Board of Supervisors holds me accountable to make sure I'm actively supervising those positions. And if I'm not feeding things back to you when there's problems, then you need to jump on me and hold me accountable for that.
Okay, Mr. Haas has been patiently waiting.
Well, I just had one item. The word building permit came out, that it's hard to get a building permit, or it was not responded to, but I'm sure everyone knows when they go to get a building permit, you take your parcel number with you, and then the staff looks up the zoning. And if the zoning doesn't match what you want to build, then you've got to go back to ground one if you still want to build it and change your zoning, because you're not going to build it in an area that doesn't allow it. And that's been that way ever since I've been here, and many, many, many years before that. And I think that's the way it is in the whole state. Council, isn't that true in the whole state of California? I mean, you abide by your general plan, your zoning, and you don't build things that are not allowed under the zoning that exist on the land that you have.
That's my general understanding, that a building, if you are trying to build something on an area that is not zoned appropriately, right, then the appropriate process is to fix the zoning. Try to get a zoning amendment or otherwise have it made acceptable.
Mr. Kehoe?
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Consistent with Mr. Lees' previous observations, I think there is an opportunity for us to clarify position management a bit. And to that end, I'm going to move the acceptance of option 2, and that directly involves 5 positions in the county.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion by board members?
Under discussion, once a motion's made, we have it agendized. May we continue the discussion on other items, or does that limit the discussion once we make that vote?
Well, certainly, I think if there's a question concerning the item on the agenda, certainly, as you can continue to bring discussion, or if there's a request to amend the motion or anything like that. So, yes.
No, specifically, I agree with the motion and the seconder. It seems to clean up a lot of area, but it doesn't quite address all the things we've talked about here today. I would like to leave this room with a little more assurance that on the day-to-day activities, especially the 2 departments that we've talked about, that we have additional accountability. And I'm not sure how to get there, so I don't want to walk away from it, because we have this great opportunity to have this discussion. Yes? Well,
as it relates to this specific motion and option that the board is considering, understand that this will still have to be brought back to the board for an action item. And so, regardless of the vote and the outcome of this particular motion, you will always have options. And that does not close the discussion on going forward today either on other things that relate to this board agenda item, as long as we stick with the agenda item. But keep in mind that by you directing this to happen, as much authority as you have, it doesn't make it so until we bring it back and you adopt the policy and ordinance change.
I think it's important to note that the option 2 is to prepare something to bring back to this board to put together some of the items that were sort of discussed. It's not actually adopting any policy at this point. We're just directing staff to move forward and prepare something for us. Right. So if you want to have some discussion about that, then this is the time to have it.
And of course, as I mentioned, I'm agreeing that we need to do that. My concern is that we find a way to strengthen your day-to-day authority. And maybe I'm saying the same thing again and again, and I'm running into a legal stone wall, no offense intended. But I would love to find a way to come away from this meeting with my office as a county supervisor being assured that that's happening, and also the public is being assured.
And yes, and I understand the concern, certainly. Bear in mind, the county code that's already adopted concerning the CAO's position already provides a great deal of administrative and supervisorial oversight by the CAO over these various positions. It's already there. It's outlined there. Anyone who can look at it can see that it's there. So I don't know how much more accountability can exist beyond what's outlined there, because it is pretty clear that there's a great deal of administrative oversight that exists.
Yes, please.
I think, to answer your question, Supervisor Ball, I think the action speaks. And I think the result is going to be, we've, I believe, made some tremendous ground in clarifying to the public, clarifying to ourselves, understanding exactly what we can and can't do. I think Mr. Cruz has given us an excellent presentation as it relates to the law and the parameters around the positions. We know that the county is a unique animal, different than cities and other agencies. We understand that and get that. So I think we've already, this issue has been brought to a level of interest. We're going to look at the potential of asking the board to make some changes there. I think the answer is going to be that, I'm getting certainly the impression and the understanding that the Board of Supervisors want to see me take a more active role in the daily supervisory role, keeping in mind I don't have the authority to tell these folks how to do their job, but I do have the ability to take a more active supervisory role. And so I think the answer will be, as it relates to how we go forward, will be dependent upon how good a job I do in doing that. And I'm going to receipt for that. And I think the public is not shy, and they're going to hold me accountable, and they're going to hold you folks accountable to those things we've said today. And I clearly have got the message that the board wants me to take a more active role in the daily supervision.
And that may, in fact, be the measure of success for this meeting and your wisdom in calling it today. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Mr. Haas?
Yes, and it's very important that we understand that those department heads are not going to circumvent the rules for anyone, because it opens all of us and the county up to lawsuits. We'll have them on a daily basis if we don't follow the rules. And a lot of them are state rules, as you mentioned, Mr. Lees. A lot of them are out of our hands, but they are rules, and we have to abide by them.
Ms. Hartman?
I think what's part of the important thing to look at here is that as much as Mr. Lees loves his job, he's not always going to be here. So I think we need to, it says it very clearly under option 2, clarify the county administrative officer's role. So I think that's what we need to look at as we move forward, so that when this board's not here, when Mr. Lees is not here, that it's still clear to the public and to the elected officials and to the CAO what those job duties are.
Mr. Keogh, did you change your mind?
I'm inclined to make this observation. There seems to be an interest, at least on the part of one supervisor, that you should get more involved in supervising county officers and department heads. And from my perspective, I think you're doing one hell of a fine job. And it's important for me to say that. I think
I also believe that.
I think you execute outstanding stewardship on the part of not only the board, but the entire county family and the citizens of Shasta County. And I wanted to say that. And I'm going to call for the question, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate that, but the chairman's going to have his words first.
Sure.
Just two comments. One, it was brought up about two bosses, and I do worry that we don't create something that's too cumbersome for our system. You start having to go to different people to get approvals and stuff. I am concerned about that. I think what has come out today, which is maybe not as known as much as people think it is that there already is in place a process that says that what the board has as far as hiring and firing authority and the supervision that the CAO has beyond that. That's very clear from your report, Mr. Cruz, and what the law says it is and what our personnel policies are. If we can elaborate that, I can clean it up a little bit. I think it's very important to maybe clarify exactly what more your role is. But beyond that, and I support doing this, but I think what I'm hearing from the public, that's really not the issue, I don't think, for them. Their issue is, if I don't like what this particular director is doing, who's going to fire them? That's what they're really asking. They're just saying, I want to complain, and who do I complain to? And if I want that person to be gone, then what's the process? I don't think it's, who's going to step in and make something happen? Who's going to change it for them? And it's clear that when it comes to some of these positions, you don't have the authority and never will have the authority to fire certain people. You can direct them, you can supervise, you can tell them to do a better job. But if people aren't happy with that, then they're going to have to come to the board because the board has the final authority to hire and fire these people. So that's just my observations. Now I will call for the question.
Very good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And that's the only item we have. So thank you for attending today's meeting. We are adjourned.